A crisis that unfolded not over weeks of careful escalation, not over months of diplomatic failure, but in a matter of hours. Hours that changed the security calculus for every nation bordering Syria. Hours that sent Jordan's civil defense sirens screaming across 3 major cities. Hours that put chemical weapons response teams on the ground in Amman for the first time since 2013. What rebel forces did in the early hours of this morning crossed a line that international monitors had hoped would hold the outer defensive perimeter of Damascus's southern corridor, long considered the last buffer between the capital's chemical stockpile sites and open conflict. And when that line broke, Jordan did not hesitate. They responded with speed, with decisiveness, and with a scale of civil preparedness that told the world everything it needed to know about how seriously Amman is taking what is unfolding just miles across its northern border. For several months now, there had been signals, not official communiques, not formal intelligence briefings released to the public, just signals that the rebel coalition operating in southern Syria was preparing something far more ambitious than its previous operations. This coalition has been aggressive, yes, but they have been methodical in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictable cadence. Strike, consolidate, resupply. Strike, consolidate, resupply. But what set off alarm bells in Amman, in Tel Aviv, and in the intelligence corridors of Washington and Brussels this week was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor rebel logistics and battlefield communications know the indicators of a major offensive in preparation, the increase in encrypted radio traffic ahead of a push, the repositioning of field commanders to forward positions, the sudden disappearance of supply convoys from known routes, not because they stopped moving, but because they moved differently, and the unusual quiet that descends on social media and propaganda channels immediately before a major operation. All of that went quiet in the 72 hours before this morning's breakthrough. And whenever this coalition goes quiet, the analysts knew it means something is about to get very, very loud. What nobody fully anticipated, what even the most pessimistic regional threat assessments had placed at a low probability, was just how far they would push in a single morning. By the time Damascus woke up, the southern corridor had been breached. Early this morning, Western surveillance assets detected what officials described as significant displacement activity near 2 known chemical storage facilities in the greater Damascus region, including the movement of specialized containment vehicles that had not been observed operating outside their storage compounds in over 4 years. These are not ordinary military movements. These are the kinds of assets that Syrian state forces only mobilize when they are signaling something very specific. Preparation for use, preparation for relocation, or preparation for destruction to prevent capture. Intelligence observers didn't know which category this fell into in the opening hours, or whether in the chaos of a rapidly deteriorating front line it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was this: the Syrian government was changing its posture toward its chemical infrastructure. And when a state actor shifts posture toward weapons of mass destruction, even by a single observable degree, every regional government pays immediate, maximum attention. Jordan's National Crisis Management Cell was convened before 6:00 a.m. local time. By 7:30 a.m., the first civil defense alerts were being prepared. By 9:00 a.m., evacuation orders were issued for portions of Irbid, Mafraq, and Ramtha, the 3 Jordanian cities closest to the Syrian border, citing in careful but unmistakable language a precautionary chemical incident protocol. The wording was deliberate, but the message was unmistakable. Jordan is treating this as a real threat. The evacuation order issued by Jordanian authorities this morning was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official, briefing after briefing, described the rebel coalition's breakthrough in terms that reflected genuine alarm, unexpected, rapid. And perhaps most critically, strategically targeted, meaning this was not a broad offensive. This was a surgical push toward a specific outcome. The rebels knew exactly what lay beyond that southern corridor. They knew what was stored there, and they moved with a precision that suggests either very good intelligence, very bold leadership, or both. Intimidation through proximity only works if the target hesitates. Jordan did not. In fact, Amman's response this morning was among the fastest civil emergency mobilizations we have seen in the region in years. Here is what we know about the timeline. Within 2 hours of the confirmed breach of the southern corridor perimeter, Jordan's Civil Defense Directorate activated its highest-tier chemical incident response protocol. These were not the standard emergency teams you would deploy for a localized chemical accident or an industrial incident. These were CBRN-rated response units, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, teams that Jordan only deploys when it is preparing for the possibility of an actual chemical weapons dispersal event across its border. Evacuation buses were rolling in Irbid before most residents had finished their morning tea. Tonight, Jordanian and international sources confirmed that the rebel coalition launched its breakthrough operation across at least 3 distinct axes of advance on the southern Damascus perimeter, including a strike on a government military checkpoint facility that had recently been reinforced. Analysts believe specifically to guard the access routes to nearby storage sites. The rebels moved before Syrian government forces could establish a coherent defensive response. They hit the checkpoint perimeter. They hit the communications relay station that coordinated government troop movements in that sector. They hit the armored vehicle staging area that was likely being prepared to support a government counteroffensive. In other words, they didn't just break the line. They systematically dismantled the infrastructure that would have allowed the government to push them back. This is precisely what made Jordan's warning so urgent. The rebel advance wasn't just another territorial gain on an already fragmented map. It represented proximity, dangerous, unprecedented proximity, to sites whose contents, if dispersed, could create a humanitarian catastrophe on Jordanian soil. And Jordan, understanding that fully, responded not with diplomatic notes or cautious statements, but with action. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically and immediately. They didn't wait for international confirmation. They didn't wait for a UN assessment team. They activated their protocols. They moved their people. They protected their cities. And here is where this story becomes even more complex and more troubling. Intelligence analysts now believe that the rebel coalition's push this morning was designed to test the response threshold of both the Syrian government and the international community following a period of perceived inattention. The coalition wanted to see whether Damascus, weakened, overextended, and diplomatically isolated, would fold under rapid pressure. But they may not have fully calculated the international dimension. They may not have anticipated that their advance would trigger chemical alert protocols in a neighboring country within hours. And that international reaction, Jordan evacuating cities, Western governments issuing urgent statements, chemical response teams mobilizing, has now reframed this conflict in a way that no battlefield advance alone could have, because this is no longer just about who controls southern Damascus. This is now, at least in the perception of the international community, about chemical weapons. And chemical weapons change everything. Senior analysts speaking with regional media under conditions of anonymity described the rebel coalition's approach as a proximity gambit, a way to pressure the Syrian government into a mistake, either deploy those chemical assets and face international obliteration, or abandon them and risk their capture. Either outcome, from the coalition's perspective, could be considered a win. But what the coalition did not count on was the speed and decisiveness of Jordan's response, which has now placed the entire operation under an international spotlight that makes every next move far more complicated. Jordan proved today that it remains both vigilant and capable. Its civil defense operation this morning was not only fast, it was coordinated so precisely that evacuation of the border region populations in Irbid, Mafraq, and Ramtha was reportedly 60 to 70% complete within 4 hours of the initial order. That operational capacity matters because it shows that Jordan has been preparing for this scenario, not hoping it would never come, but actively training for the day it would. It shows that Jordan is not a passive bystander in this regional crisis. It is an active, prepared, and capable responder. As reports continued coming in throughout the morning and into the afternoon, we learned more about the true scale of what is unfolding. Jordanian Royal Air Force assets were repositioned to northern air bases, forcing a visible increase in the aerial surveillance corridor along the Syrian border. United Nations Disengagement Observer Force personnel in the region were placed on heightened alert status and consolidated to protected positions that had been dormant in the last 18 months. American military assets operating in the broader region reportedly increased reconnaissance activity over southern Syria, tracking movement around the facilities of concern. This was not just a civil evacuation. This was not just a border security adjustment. This was a coordinated, multi-actor international response. This was the regional architecture of deterrence being activated in real time. And that architecture, That collective, coordinated readiness is the one thing that adversarial actors have struggled to undermine since the region's last major chemical incident. For every tactical advance the rebel coalition has made this year, the international response architecture has countered with something that raises the cost of escalation. Today was no different, but today felt more serious because today Jordan evacuated its cities. Remember, Syria was supposed to have surrendered its chemical weapons program entirely. That was the deal brokered in 2013 under international pressure after the Ghouta attacks, in which sarin gas killed hundreds of civilians in the suburbs of Damascus. The world was told the stockpiles were gone. Destroyed, verified. They were told the program had been dismantled under international supervision and that Syria would never again be in a position to use or threaten to use chemical weapons. But tonight, the exact opposite narrative is playing out. International monitors are tracking movement around chemical storage sites. A neighboring country is evacuating its cities under a chemical incident protocol. And the international community is once again being forced to confront the possibility that the 2013 agreement was incomplete, or that what remained has never fully been accounted for. The ghosts of Ghouta are present in every briefing room tonight. What makes this moment so volatile and so dangerous is that the rebel coalition's breakthrough happened at a time when the Syrian government is operating under extraordinary pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Hardline factions within the government's own security structure want a maximum force response to the breach, regardless of international consequences. Pragmatic military commanders want a controlled, defensible response that does not invite international intervention. Civilian government elements want a diplomatic off-ramp that preserves some semblance of international legitimacy. And Iran and Russia, the two external powers whose support has kept the Syrian government operational for years, want two entirely different things from this situation, and their interests are not currently aligned. Damascus is attempting to balance these competing demands while simultaneously managing an active frontline collapse in its southern approaches. And when governments in that position, cornered, pressured, watching their perimeter crumble, make sudden decisions about their most dangerous assets, they are not doing it from strength, they are doing it from panic, they are doing it from desperation. And desperate decisions made quickly around chemical weapons stockpiles are the scenario that keeps international security officials awake at night. The statement issued by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons tonight, now circulated to all member states, was designed to signal unambiguously that the international community is not willing to allow this situation to drift toward chemical weapons use or dispersal. OPCW officials said plainly that the movement of chemical-related assets detected in the Damascus region was inconsistent with Syria's obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention and with prior verification agreements. That is careful, diplomatic language for, we see what you are doing, the world is watching, and there will be consequences. You do not usually hear that tone from the OPCW, an organization that by its nature prefers technical language and procedural caution unless something genuinely serious has entered the frame. The fact that such a statement was issued within hours of this morning's events tells you everything about how the international community is reading this moment. This is not a drill. This is not a false alarm. This is a live crisis. Meanwhile, Jordan's King Abdullah II addressed the nation in a brief, composed but unmistakably grave televised statement tonight. He said, Jordan will protect every inch of its territory and every one of its citizens. We have activated every protocol we have built for precisely this moment. He said, the evacuation of our northern cities is not a sign of fear. It is a demonstration of our government's commitment to the safety of the Jordanian people above all other considerations. And he said, we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint with respect to weapons that have no place in any conflict anywhere at any time. These are not rhetorical flourishes for domestic political consumption. These are statements from a monarch who sits at the edge of a potential chemical weapons incident, who has just ordered tens of thousands of his citizens to leave their homes, and who understands with absolute clarity just how high the stakes of the next 24 to 48 hours have become. Here is what makes the situation even more alarming. The rebel coalition's breakthrough this morning was not an isolated operation. Along with the primary southern Damascus advance, a separate rebel-aligned faction in eastern Deir ez-Zor simultaneously launched probing attacks on government checkpoints, stretching Syrian military resources further and preventing the redeployment of reserves to the south. pro-government militia forces in the Daraa region reported unusual movements from armed groups along routes that intelligence officials believe may be used for resupply of the southern operation. Drone activity attributed to non-state actors increased significantly over the Damascus eastern suburbs overnight, the kind of persistent surveillance pattern that precedes a second strike, not a withdrawal. All of this happened within the same 12-hour window. When a complex actor moves multiple pieces simultaneously across multiple geographic fronts, it does not mean they are improvising. It means they have a plan, a coordinated, deliberate plan. And plans of that sophistication, executed against a government already under pressure, with chemical weapons storage sites inside the advancing corridor, that is the definition of a strategic emergency. Senior analysts and regional security officials are now examining several distinct scenarios for what comes next. The first possibility is that the Syrian government, facing imminent loss of control over facilities near Damascus, opts to relocate chemical assets deeper into government-held territory, a move that would be extremely dangerous in transit and would almost certainly be detected and potentially intercepted. The second possibility is that the rebel coalition, having achieved its breakthrough, pauses and attempts to leverage its position diplomatically, using proximity to the storage sites as a bargaining chip to force negotiations or international intervention. The third possibility, the one that officials in Amman, Jerusalem, and Washington are losing sleep over tonight, is that a breakdown in command and control on either side leads to an accidental or unauthorized release, not as a deliberate weapons deployment, but as a catastrophic consequence of a chaotic battlefield, a chemical release without anyone intending it. That is not a scenario anyone can fully plan for. But today, Jordan took that risk seriously enough to evacuate its cities. What we are watching tonight is, at its core, a test of international deterrence architecture in the post-2013 world. The rebel coalition wants to see whether the threat of chemical weapons proximity creates enough international pressure to force Syrian government concessions or collapse. The Syrian government wants to demonstrate that it retains full control of its most sensitive assets, and that the breakthrough, while serious, does not threaten the stability of the capital. The international community, led tonight by Jordan's visible and rapid response, wants to prevent any outcome in which chemical weapons enter the equation as an active element, whether through use, dispersal, capture, or accident. And the monitoring organizations, now watching in real time, want to demonstrate that the verification architecture built after 2013 still has meaning, that it can respond, that it can deter, that it can matter. All four of these objectives are in motion simultaneously tonight, and the next move belongs to Damascus. Tonight, we have heard from multiple regional intelligence sources who are now conducting continuous monitoring of all movement in and around the identified facilities south of Damascus. They say that as of the most recent surveillance window, no movement of chemical agents themselves has been confirmed. The vehicles observed earlier today appear to have been associated with perimeter security adjustments, not active transfer operations. They say that rebel forces have consolidated their breakthrough position, but have not advanced further toward Damascus in the past several hours, suggesting either a pause for resupply, a deliberate pressure hold, or uncertainty about their own next move. And they say that the Syrian government's decision to reinforce the internal security cordon around the facilities of concern, rather than evacuate or relocate assets, is likely part of a strategy intended to signal control and stability to both domestic and international audiences. But Jordan is not standing down. In fact, Jordan is expanding its response posture. Their civil defense operation today, rapid, organized, and calibrated, sent a message to Damascus that Amman is prepared to protect its population from whatever happens next. And it sent a message to the international community that the regional response architecture is alive, functional, and capable of acting faster than the crisis it is responding to. As this extraordinarily tense day continues, we expect more information to emerge in the coming hours about what exactly the rebel coalition hoped to achieve with this morning's operation, and whether they anticipated the international chemical alert it would trigger. But what we do know is that Jordan's response was timely in every sense. It protected civilian populations in 3 cities before the situation could deteriorate further. It sent an immediate, unmistakable signal to all parties that chemical weapons use or dispersal would not occur in a vacuum. that a neighboring country with capable, prepared civil defense institutions would respond with full force to protect its people. And it reframed this conflict, died in the eyes of every government watching tonight, from a Syrian civil war territorial dispute into an active international chemical security emergency. What happens next will depend on what Damascus decides to do in the next 24 to 48 hours. If the Syrian government demonstrates convincing, verifiable control over its chemical infrastructure and the rebel coalition does not push further, this moment may be remembered as a close call, a crisis that was managed through rapid response and clear deterrence signaling. If the situation deteriorates further, Jordan, the international community, and every regional security institution have already demonstrated tonight that they are not watching passively. They are watching actively. They are prepared, and they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in years, Damascus appears genuinely uncertain. The capital is quiet, too quiet. And when a government under this kind of pressure goes quiet, when the official statements stop, when the military briefings cease, when the propaganda apparatus falls silent, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move with extreme care because they understand that the wrong move could bring consequences they cannot control. Because tonight, Damascus learned something it has been taught before, but perhaps never so starkly, that chemical weapons are not leverage, they are a trap. That the moment they enter the equation, even as a rumor, even as a possibility, the entire world stops watching the battlefield and starts watching the stockpile. And that Jordan, quiet, steady, often overlooked Jordan, is not a passive buffer between Syria's chaos and the wider region. It is an active, prepared, and sovereign nation that will move mountains and move its own people to protect them. This story is far from over. The breakthrough has happened. The alert has been issued. The cities have been evacuated. But tonight, one thing is absolutely clear. The international community has drawn its line. Jordan has shown what it means to take a chemical threat seriously, and the next move, whatever it is, will be watched by every government, every intelligence service, and every humanitarian organization on earth. We will be here through the night and into the coming days, watching every development as this next and most dangerous phase of the Syrian crisis begins to unfold.